Today we have with us a remarkable guest, Jason Merkoski, the founder of Kindle, and of course someone who has many startups under his belt, who happens to be here in Seoul with us. So we're looking forward to hearing a little bit about his perspectives on the future of eBooks and of course his views on Korea. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you, Emmanuel. This is awesome. I'm glad to be here.
So tell us a little bit. This is your third visit here in Korea?
Yeah, the third visit in a year. It's been pretty amazing. I came last year to give a keynote about cloud computing. Then in May, I was here for the Asian Leadership Conference. And most recently, I'm back here to talk about startups, because startups are cool, and I've got a couple, and I'd love to share what I know with people to help.
So what is it about Korea that keeps bringing you back?
It's interesting. I had written a book about what it was like working at Amazon and, being one of the inventors of the Kindle and creating a new kind of reading experience, right? Moving from print to digital. And it really, this book called Burning the Page really kind of found great roots here in South Korea. And I think there's just an incredible appetite for learning about like what happened and why. And, there's an intense curiosity here. And I feel that every time I come here, and I myself am curious, because there's just so much to see and explore and learn about.
So what sort of advice did you give to these young Koreans who are interested in startups?
Well, it was really cool. So there's a whole audience, hundreds of people there, a lot of young Koreans coming in and doing what's called a pitch, right? So that's where they come in and they say, okay, I've got this company, and here's why I think you should give me lots of money. And so before they start doing that, I'm kind of coaching them on it. And the big thing I want to tell everyone here is there's been a major shift in America with Silicon Valley, and Silicon Valley is where Apple is, it's where a lot of great technology is, and the one thing that's really common there is it's okay to fail. It's okay not to dress up for work, it's okay to sleep at work, it's okay to sit on the floor instead of an office, but more importantly, it's okay to fail. If you're doing what you really believe in and really care about, do it, make mistakes, don't worry about what your parents think. There's a great American physicist named Richard Feynman, and I love the guy, he was a great writer and a great physicist. He had the incredible insight that he would write and tell everyone about, and I spread his word also. It's, what do you care about what other people think? So if you've got a startup and you're really passionate about it, and you really believe in the product, I don't care, and no one else should care. You should care. Don't worry about what your mom or dad say, or your grandparents, or your colleagues. Just go forth boldly and build a cool product.
But I guess in Korean society and in many countries in Asia, that is the biggest barrier, right? This concern about if I fail, my reputation, my future will be somehow crippled by that.
Exactly. And so, I had a lot of great one-on-one sessions with people afterwards, Emmanuel, just talking about how I totally appreciate that those are the cultural norms right now, but look, coming from America, having worked at Intel and Google and Amazon, what I've observed is it's very common for people to last no more than a year in a job. They spend a year learning something. They're very valuable for that 1 year they spend. They can then ask for like $20,000 more a year 1 year later at another company. So there's this great process happening in Silicon Valley in America, which is like cross-pollinization, where you get a bunch of flowers in the garden and the bees are taking pollen from one to the other, and you're getting these incredible new plants, and it's people. It's the knowledge that we have as people. So that flexibility to leave our jobs and take new ones and grow, that's one of the things I'm trying to encourage people to do and feel comfortable about.
So in a way, that's an ideal situation, but many people here in Korea or around the world, the issue of getting that initial investment, how does one secure that? This is what they're thinking of. Do you have any thoughts or suggestions for those who might be thinking about starting something up?
Well, that's why I'm here, Emmanuel. So I'm going to ask everyone, mail me some money. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, it's as a CEO, as a startup, you have to do what it takes to launch your product. Especially if you care about it. So it used to be that you'd go to a venture capitalist and you'd ask them for money and you'd give away 30% of your company for a small amount of money. And it's sort of like selling, you give away your shirt. You're giving away so much and you're walking around half shirtless and half naked. There's some really interesting options now with crowdsourcing, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, Circle Up. And the great thing with this is you give away maybe 5% of your company and there's no real impact, right? So if the company folds, all right, you lost.
Right.
Whereas if you go down traditional venture capital, you give away 30% of your company,
Right.
and if you fail, they're going to come after you for that money,
Right,
and your
right.
reputation is kind of
Right.
changed.
Right.
Everything's totally different. Like I'm seeing a shift from New York. Like all the Wall Street people are moving to Silicon Valley.
Right.
The former chief investment officer of Goldman Sachs now is chief finance officer of Google.
Right.
So it's a huge shift from like old
Right.
established money
Right.
to Silicon Valley money. So my advice to Koreans or anyone who's really interested in pursuing a startup is like, try to avoid like venture capital as we know it. Like,
Right.
talk to your family and your friends and your network of people. Private
Right.
equity is still really good,
Right.
but also investigate crowdsourcing.
Right.
And that's the other message I'm trying to tell everyone too, right? It used to be you would come up with a product, you dream it up,
Right.
and we kind of did that at Kindle, and so I've got a lot of experience doing that. But it used to be in the old days you'd spend maybe 5 years slowly developing a product,
Right.
and then you'd finally launch it with a big bang.
Right.
Those days
Right.
are over. You want to
Right.
go out there really fast and get immediate customer feedback. And the expression that we like to use is fail fast.
Right.
If customers aren't using your product, it's probably not a good product.
Right. So you mentioned this shift towards Silicon Valley, but I'm curious now. Of course, you're coming from Silicon Valley even further to the west, right? To Seoul. Do you see that sort of shift that people are actually moving? I mean, first, of course, from Wall Street to say Silicon Valley, but also from Silicon Valley to say to Seoul or to Asia. Is that a shift too?
Maybe if you logically continue that trend, you kind of come back to where you
Come all the way
start.
back.
I think the world is flat.
Right. Right.
We're kind of back in the early days of Greece.
Right.
Before the heliocentric model was developed, and I think the internet has allowed us to have Skype calls with anyone on the planet.
Right.
So with my own startup now, I've got people in the Ukraine, in Russia.
Right.
I would love to have people in South Korea. I've got people working for me in England and the United States. It's very fluid, flexible,
Right.
because the internet lets you do that now.
Right.
And it used to be impossible. So I'd say the world is flat from a financing perspective too. I was at the conference yesterday talking to investment people from France as well as from Spain,
Right.
and giving advice to people in Seoul. I think the lesson is just be agile
Right.
and look for opportunity.
So in terms of your career, after your successful founding of Kindle, you had sort of a straight shot for sort of Main Street corporate life, but you've chosen a slightly different path. Can you tell us a little bit about that decision and its consequences?
I'm happy to, yeah. I mean, I was one of the early members of the Kindle team back when there was just a handful of people. And it was great because I got to be there, inventing hardware,
Right.
inventing software, creating a new kind of content, creating a whole ecosystem,
Right.
which was an amazing thing. I got to work with a lot of very smart people, including Jeff Bezos and a lot of his SVPs as one of the key contributing early members. But, at some point, you kind of realize what you're good at as a human being.
Right.
And I realize I'm very good and I enjoy that kind of early startup-y
Right.
thing before things are really
flux,
fixed.
right.
The flux. I
Right.
love flux. Change. It's really all about that. But at some point, though, when you're running a successful company like Amazon
Right.
and Kindle, when you're talking about billions of dollars,
Right.
A different mode of thinking comes in. It's about operational improvements.
Right.
How can you squeeze margins from this to that?
Right.
And to me, that's a lot less creative, a lot less interesting. So they definitely wanted to keep me, and they definitely wanted to hold me
Right.
and prevent me from going. And they fought their hardest, but I just couldn't see myself there. I think it's a different kind of person. It's sort of like,
For sure.
the Marines are there,
Right.
and they're making mistakes, but they're doing a lot of big
Right,
changes.
right.
And then at some point, they're replaced by the police.
Right,
And then
right.
private security guards. And, I kind of want that more tough group of people to hang out with where you're doing earth-shaking things.
Right. So in terms of some of those earth-shaking things, you have this new application, Be Forever Me.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that and how, if we look from Kindle to this new development, Be Forever Me, what are some of the shifts and changes?
Yeah, exactly, right? I'm continuing with Kindle because, and we talked about this earlier. I love story,
Right.
and I think we're both interested in how people tell stories and language and how
Right.
that works. And if you look back at the way people once told stories, we would sit around campfires.
Right.
We would talk about the hunt. We would talk about,
Right.
who's dating whom and who's sick and who's in charge.
Right.
Gossip, right?
Right.
And there's big parts of the brain that are activated by gossip and talk. That's why people who have Alzheimer's tend to slow down their rate of Alzheimer's just by talking and being in social situations.
Interesting.
That's why social networks are so popular.
Right.
They really tap into a deep brain need. So I don't think it's a matter anymore of textual narrative. I think that's important. Because when you're writing text, it forces you to think and craft a logical sequence of ideas. But a lot of human nature is spontaneous, and I observed it being here in Seoul, walking around and observing people. I just sat yesterday in this mall below the hotel where we're filming this and just observed people and how they talk. And we do talk as human beings. We engage and we make eye contact. And so what I'm doing now is I'm trying to preserve that because, for example, I love my grandmom a lot, but she's no longer here. And I would love dearly to be able to talk to her, but she's gone. And I realized all I've got is 15 minutes of her talking. And that's it. I used to be at her house every weekend, every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, and this big part of my life is gone. And I would like my kids one day to know what she was like, or at least to know what my own mom or dad are like.
But you, in a sense, you do have her inside your own mind, right?
That's
You have created this sort of like sort of internalized image of your mother, your father, your grandmother, or at least I do, certainly.
That's right. And you can tell stories about people, right?
Right.
But it's different from hearing your actual grandmom's laugh.
That's for sure.
And those overtones that really, and what I want to do is help people tell their stories. And so that's what we're doing at Be4Ever Me. It's a storytelling platform where what we want to do is ask you just tell your stories so that way your generation can know your parents' generation, your kids can know you, to help families and friends get to know each other in a real way. Because what I see with social networks, you put something on Facebook or Twitter, a day later it's gone. How do you find that memory?
So is it like a wiki type format? I mean, tell me about your Be4Ever. How is it organized? The information?
So imagine this. Here's the problem, right? So you and I have lived a long time. We've got a lot of experiences. If I want to ask you about what it was like when you first came to Seoul years ago, I would be asking you a question, and you'd be answering me. So I believe the ultimate way of organizing this knowledge is through search, conversational search. Ask questions the way that we're used to doing it as people. And that return to oral storytelling, I think, is what's important. If you look at the way that stories emerge with Homer, there's people that say Homer's a fictional construct. There was no Homer. No one wrote the Odyssey or Iliad. It was a collection of bards, of storytellers. But what storytellers would do is they would remember their stories and share them with other people.
So maybe we could go back to Kindle and reading. You yourself are a reader. So in terms of this transition from the paper book to the ebook or to Kindle, there's obviously a lot of resistance, and some people feel there's something just about books, turning pages, the smell of books that's so appealing. So what were the sort of strategies, approaches to sort of bridge that transition, and do you really think that there's a world without any books? Can we really?
I think a world without books would be a very sad place. I've got more books than friends in my life, and I think that's probably how it should be. Books are amazing companions, and I think when we look at things 5 years from now, it's not going to really matter whether they're ebooks or print books. We're going to talk about books, but they're going to be ebooks. So I think what I'm seeing is this cultural shift. It's a lot like with vinyl LPs. There's a resurgence in parts of the world where people are playing old vinyl records because
it's fun.
That's right, and the fidelity is better. It sounds a little bit better because it's not clipped like CDs are at 22,000 hertz. You have a bigger dynamic range, but and there was something about the act of being in the book, the smell, as long as it doesn't smell like bad fish, and some paper smells bad. And I think it's a generational thing. So my generation, we grew up with print books, comic books, and so it's very hard for us to let go of that. But digital natives, people that grew up with the internet, and what I'm seeing over and over again is they don't really have as much patience for real-world print books. So it's like everything else, People who tend to do better on social networks are those who always had access to social networks. And so we're just seeing a generational shift the same way we moved away on the audio side. We don't have wax cylinders. We don't have 8-track cassettes. We don't listen to audio cassettes anymore. We barely listen to CDs anymore. We stream music.
So in terms of Kindles, current Kindles, forgive my ignorance, but do you have like a different line between those which are connected, which are say on the net, you can get all sorts of other applications, and those which are only for reading, essentially?
Yeah. So, and the way that Kindle and others do this is they do precisely that, right? So, you've got dedicated e-readers,
right?
And so an example that would be in the market now is the Paperwhite.
Right.
So, and Barnes & Noble, another US retailer of content, has a similar thing. So it's a dedicated reading device.
Right.
It's not going to check your email. You can't do social networking.
Right.
You can't even play games on it. It just, but it's great for reading.
Right, exactly.
Whether you want to read books or magazines or blogs, it's there. And then what they do is there's a other side of the spectrum where it's more of a tablet.
Right.
And so, it's interesting. If you ask people, do they read eBooks, and do they have an e-reader? They'll say, no, we don't. A lot of people don't own e-readers. But if you say, do you have a tablet and do you read on your tablet or a smartphone?
Right.
They'll say, oh yeah, absolutely.
All the time.
So most people at this point are reading digitally.
Right. Right.
Yeah, but you don't need a dedicated reader. Just on a non-dedicated reader, you're taken out of the experience.
Right.
Which is good and bad, right? So sometimes if you're reading throwaway fiction, and it's just to pass the time on a train,
right?
What's the harm?
Right. So when you started Kindle, of course, there were many different approaches you could have taken, and you made certain key decisions in terms of what it would do and what it would not do. Looking back on that process, do you have a sense in terms of what were the critical positives about what you chose for Kindle, and what might have been some possibilities you didn't explore in terms of how it could have been put together?
Yeah, what I've observed is, when we invented the Kindle, it's a lot like when print was invented.
Interesting.
And so, actually, and you probably know this, in South Korea, this is where printing was really invented as we know it.
Right.
We tend to talk about Gutenberg and the printing press.
Right.
It was invented here in South Korea hundreds of years earlier. Right. It just happened that it became, for whatever cultural reason, more popular in Europe, circa the late 1400s, and I can talk about that if you want to, but it diffused from there.
Right.
And what was interesting to me is reading accounts of Gutenberg inventing the Gutenberg Bible. He spent a lot of time trying to do basic things like how many lines of text should there be on a page?
Right.
If you have too many lines of text on a page, it's too dense and it's hard to read, but it's more economical because you're using less paper.
Right.
And if it's too many bits of white space, you have to have a book with more paper, and it's bulkier. And we did the same thing at Kindle. So I was in meetings with Jeff and a lot of the other people when we were coming up with these ideas, and we were having the same conversations that happened 500 years ago.
Interesting.
We're just reinventing the wheel in some ways, but doing it in a more digital way. We went through that same process. How many lines should be on a screen? On the hardware side, there was a lot of very cool stuff, right? Because a Kindle is a physical device. And there were a lot of playful versions of it we created that never quite made it.
Right.
It's like looking at fossils. Not all fossils become animals that stay alive. Some of them just die.
Right.
And there's a lot of really interesting fossils of Kindles that could have been that had a lot of really neat features.
Right.
But it's evolution, and you see a lot of that with technology. You're evolving features really fast to make your consumer happy.
So as part of your next step, you wrote a book called Burning the Page, in which you talked rather insightfully about the future of reading and the implications of technology. Could you tell us a little bit about that book and what you see as the future?
It's funny, right? Is writing a book about the future really the future? And I'm still, my personal jury might be out on that.
Right.
Because I do believe there's so much stuff happening on social networks, and we're kind of moving towards a more visual, video-based mode of interaction.
Interesting.
And what I like about video and audio is it really expresses a person. If I read something that you write, it's just dry words on a page.
Right.
And maybe your personality comes through. But being here and talking to you, like I can learn so much about you from 30 seconds just interacting with you. And I think as a human, my brain, like all of our brains, are really adapted towards visual. 50% of the human brain is all about the eyes and the visual system. And 87% of our neurons, our sensory neurons in our head, are dedicated to processing visual input. And so reading is kind of a denuded experience in a way.
Right.
It's typically a black and white experience.
Right.
It's almost like you're putting your mind in prison for for the duration of the reading experience, because we're used to like this richness and like, what does he think, and is he smiling, and we're used to looking at people and inferring what are they thinking. In our minds, we're always creating stories and narratives. But when you put this in a linear format as words on a page, I think you're taking away from the human experience. But that said, books are amazingly robust ways of getting knowledge out there, right? We've had cuneiform tablets since 3000 BC, and we're still turning up troves of them throughout the Middle East, and knowledge from thousands of years ago is preserved, and it's amazing.
Right.
And we need that as a species because, humans are not born being able to go for a walk and go down to McDonald's and feed yourself. It takes us years before we're able to be self-sufficient. And calves, sheep, all the baby animals that are born in nature can instinctively start eating and follow their mothers within minutes after being born. We can't, and it's true with our knowledge. We need books or something like a book to preserve our cultural heritage. That's why they're so priceless.
Right.
But I would argue about the format of the book as being a bit denuded and not necessarily engaging us. So when we talk about people not reading as much, and when we gripe about
Right.
changing reading habits, I think the problem is really one of technology, and we as technologists need to do a better job coming up with a better experience for communicating knowledge and telling stories.
So in terms of ebooks, looking towards the future, of course,
Yeah.
in your book, there's a question of the cost, right? So the cost of making ebooks, of course, goes down. The profit margins may go down. And of course, there's the possibility things are heading towards essentially free, right? The YouTube type experience. How do we respond to this in terms of both making it sustainable, making it something that people can do creatively, but actually still live on? What are your thoughts?
Man, Emmanuel, you ask a great question, and this is the central question of the digital age.
Right.
How do you ascetize content?
Right.
How do you put a price on content?
Correct.
Right, and so I think there's got to be a better balance in putting it out there for free, but no real platform has emerged for that. And it's very parasitic, right? If we take, or if one of your watchers takes his videos
Right.
of our interview and puts it
Right.
on YouTube
Right.
for free,
Right.
they're going to make money off of it
Right.
because people will go to their YouTube page, YouTube will serve up ads,
Right.
and as more watchers come to that,
Right.
they're going to get ad income from that.
Right.
And so, there's, I think...
Someone will get income. Maybe
Right,
not
whether
the person who puts it up, but
That's right, someone will get an income.
Right.
And it typically is ad-based income. And there's a model there that could work.
Right.
I think the problem is at this point, we've kind of made this bargain with the devil, and we said content deserves to be free.
Right.
And there's a sort of a mantra that developed in the 1970s by the Open Source Software Project, which was founded by Richard Stallman from MIT, and his whole approach in the late 1970s was software deserves to be free.
Right.
And that morphed into the nature that content should be free, because a lot of the people making content available digitally were software people. The people who invented YouTube, these were not people making cars, these were people making software. So they were steeped in that open source movement, which is very idealistic in a way, but it doesn't protect content creators.
Right.
So I think the way things are going actually is people say, if you're a music label, you might make money even though your music is pirated or made available for free.
Right.
You might make residuals from the sale of baseball caps
Right.
or jerseys or autographs.
Or speeches, right?
Yeah, and there's truth to that.
Right.
I think myself, I've made more from speaking engagements than from the sale of my own book and royalties,
Right.
because the nature of content is changing, right?
Right.
It's almost like a gateway drug.
Interesting. It's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah.
Well, I guess there's the analogy that you've made, but say the sale of printers or razor blades, right? So you buy a printer cheap, but the ink is what's going to cost you, or you buy the razor is not so expensive, but the blades is where the profit is long term.
And so now, right, in the ebook space, of course, you have ebook readers, and those would be the actual razors.
Right.
And then you have content that you'd read on the reader, and those are the blades. And what's interesting is when we came up with Kindle, there was a perception that we could sell ebooks cheaper, often at $9.99 per book,
Right.
which is materially cheaper than the print equivalent.
For sure.
There's been a shift in pricing models now, and actually eBooks are coming up to be the same cost as print.
Right.
It's a sort of a last-ditch effort, I would say, on behalf of publishers.
Right.
And I understand their thinking, right? You know, when you put a lot of effort into like writing a piece of content, and editing it, and marketing it, and doing book cover design, you know, you don't want to throw it away and sell the content for a couple pennies or a couple bucks digitally, because you can. You have to recover these costs.
Right.
So publishers they're very scared. Every time I go to New York, I meet with some publisher friends at Random House, Penguin, and a bunch of others. They were very scared. It's sort of like Titanic night, when the iceberg approaches, and they're off there, and it's already hit the iceberg. They're still walking around the deck with their champagne. But they know what's happening, and a lot of them are polishing off their resumes. So my advice is to anyone who wants to get in the field of publishing, don't.
But there's a larger world. I mean, publishing in terms of just book content, of course, is limited, but there are larger sort of issues of like sort of lifestyle or sort of worldview, which seems to be just taking off in a way, the full potential.
That's right. Traditional publishing is really, I think it's peaked. And you know, we're kind of coming down from that peak now, but there are new modes. You know, people who can be internet superstars. You know, it's really interesting. When you look at media consumption, we typically think that people will watch the most popular TV shows or movies, and that's where people's eyeballs are. But there's a sort of underside to this iceberg of media content. It's not just the top sports games with football, soccer, and others. It's internet stars on YouTube and Vine and others. That's where people's eyeballs are really going. 7 of the top 10 online experiences are non-traditional, non-TV superstars who draw in lots of people. So you're right, publishing is changing. Book publishing, however, is having a hard time adapting.
Well, maybe we can speak specifically about the Korean case, which you're now exploring quite intensely. So Korea is an interesting case, right? It's an extremely high literacy rate, extremely sophisticated in terms of IT and infrastructure. However, eBooks has not been quite the big medium here in Korea. What are your thoughts about that in the future?
Yeah, I'm not too worried about the future. You know, I think whenever I go in a subway system here and I watch everyone on smartphones and tablets, and I see a very highly tech literate culture. You know, I see something I don't even see in America. You know, in America you might see, you know, a handful of digital natives, people that grew up with the internet, engaging on smartphones, and then there's a divide. People 35 years and older don't engage. Here I see so much engagement in digital media, and that tells me that I'm not worried. You know, there's a population here that's tech savvy. And whether they're reading print or digital doesn't matter too much to me, because I know they're engaging in experiences which are growing their minds. You know, and I was also impressed checking out a real world bookstore yesterday. There's a lot of great design coming out of South Korea.
That's very true.
You know, in terms of book design, cover design, page layout. So it's still flourishing here, and that's great. You know, as an artist myself and someone who appreciates the arts, I was really enthralled by that experience. As far as long-term trends, I would say the internet experience here is amazing. Like, I was blown away that just coming from the airport in a taxi, I was able to surf online through Wi-Fi. We don't even have that in America. I can't get in a taxi and hook up to a Wi-Fi network. So, I mean, there are some things here that are just light years ahead of what I've seen, and I'm really impressed by it.
Very true.
And I see an aptitude towards the digital. If I don't see people reading ebooks, I'm not worried, because I think that digital aptitude is more important, because our culture globally is going towards that shift. What I would like to see from South Korea is to really do a better job moving that forward, you know, contributing, coming up with new services, because the infrastructure is so good here. I think there's so much potential.
Well, this brings us back to the startup issue, right? That in Korea, we've had a certain hesitation, that fear of failure. Also a little issue, not just in Korea, but the issue of initial financing for your projects. And also the issue of scale, that people feel if you want to go into publishing or something like that, not only not particularly profitable, but there are these big giants out there. So how do you start small? How do you get into that niche?
That's right. And so I think the first thing is just make sure you've got a really good product. So, and we all have products. I mean, you've got a product, right? This experience here is part of your product. And so it's very easy to find products, but is it the right product? You know, and so what I would encourage people to do is just iterate really fast, and by iterate, what I really mean is experiment.
Right.
If you think that your concept is going to work for a particular audience segment,
Right.
get the product out there in some way that's really fast. And what we call that in the tech space is a minimum viable product.
Minimum viable product.
An MVP, right?
MVP, I remember that one.
Yeah, like for example, let's say you're going to make an airplane from scratch. A minimum viable airplane might not even fly, but it might be enough for you to kind of sit inside it and have someone push you down a dirt road, and someone's there serving you drinks. So you can kind of explore what the concept is like, and you learn
Dry
about that.
run.
A dry run.
Right. Yes.
Do dry runs really fast. And what I've seen on the
wind tunnel for
well, but people used to spend a lot of time building wind tunnels, and they would do feasibility studies, and so it would take 10 or 20 years to do a new version of an airplane. So the way that we think now in Silicon Valley is iterate, dry run, learn about your product, learn about your customer, and the act of doing that will give you a lot of insight that you can then take to investors and say, we tried 5 times, the first 4 failed, but the 5th time really seemed to work. We're getting a lot of customers. That's going to be a great message to investors.
Right.
And so it sort of turns around a typical way of thinking. It's non-perfectionistic.
But it's fascinating because you started with this issue of storytelling, and I realize now that it comes together on both sides. Storytelling is content, but it is also how you get the investor, the customer, to buy into your vision.
And a lot of people don't do a very good job of that.
Right.
So I was at this, the Global Startup 2015 experience yesterday, watching a lot of very naive founders and CEOs pitch their product. Man, you've got to sell it.
Right.
You've got to push, the website it's on. You've got to really talk about it.
Right.
And you've really got to be passionate and show that. Because so much of what we do in startups and technology, and you'll appreciate this too, it's perception, it's brand, and it's confidence.
For sure.
So, if you came here on a stage and, I don't know what I'm talking about, you're all nervous and there's sweat dripping off your face, your viewers aren't going to watch. But if you come out here confident, and your guests are confident, all right, well, there's a story. And so people who are founders, who are pitching a product, need to realize that psychological dimension. What is your story? Practice standing in front of a mirror for 2 hours and telling people your story. Don't memorize it. Stories aren't memorized. Rosy-fingered Dawn and crafty Achilles. We talked about this earlier. It's a bag of phrases and words, but just get confident with yourself and your own story. That's the thing I saw most of all from an experience with talking to a lot of Koreans who are doing their own startups. It's the lack of confidence and that need to get things right. It's okay if it's wrong, but just be passionate about it.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Koreans are passionate. There is a certain passion here, but somehow at that moment it sort of freezes up at the formal presentation.
Yeah, and it comes back to that, I think that fear of failure. It's I've failed at my first 2 startups, but I learned so much from that, and I have a better chance now of getting capital from investors because I've failed.
Interesting. So I want to ask a little bit more about storytelling in books. I know that books are very important to you in your own life. You collect books. You love books. How is this idea, the concept of the book, so central in your own life and in your approach to business?
Wow. I think for me it comes back to story. So if I look at my own family, I think family stories are an important part of our personal stories. My grandfather came to America from Europe. He didn't know how to read, and he was a truck driver, and simply couldn't read English. But he raised my father, who went off to write poetry, and he was the first person in our family to go to college. And it was a very telling story that, when my grandfather died, there was one of my father's poems in his locker. He couldn't read it, but he appreciated the fact that my father was writing.
Interesting.
And so, I look at myself then, kind of like continuing from my father. My father was a newspaper editor for 40 years, crafting the day's news and public perception. And I'm lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time with the right ideas to help reinvent how we read and how books are experienced. So I think that story for me of language is a very rooted one. Like I really see there's some sort of progress, and I'm able to contribute to how people experience words and experience language and story. When I went to MIT, I got a degree in writing and a degree in math. And for me, the two are very similar.
Right.
Except equations are more boring, and you can't really characterize the
Right,
equal sign.
right.
Like an equal sign is always an equal sign. Letter 3 is always letter 3. It's not a red 3 with a beard.
Right.
And so you can do amazing flexible things with language. And so I went off to become a novelist during the 1990s. So when everyone was out there building the dot-com economy and it was like blowing up, I was writing a novel about the Great Depression and how people are out of work. And so for me, story is just very important. Books are very important. I've got 3,000 print books at home, so I still read print.
Excellent.
But every time I move houses, it's very hard to pack them all up.
I understand. I fully understand. And so coming back to our audience, people out there who want to start a new company, of course, Kindle was a particular moment in a particular sort of transition. But looking forward, do you have any hints or secrets you might give out in terms of what you think that on the horizon, what are some new potentials in terms of startup companies that could be successful? Yeah,
so my advice, and I'm very free with my advice here, is realize that the internet is the great disruptor. And so do what you can with the internet, with your startup, to disintermediate. That's what Airbnb is doing, right? You don't go to hotels anymore. You go to people that use Airbnb or other sites that rent out their homes on a daily basis.
Tell us a little bit about, just for our audience who may not know.
Oh, so it's this very amazing, interesting concept of you own a house or you rent a house, and, well, you want to make a little bit of money. So you put your house on the market to rent like a hotel room, and people will bid for it and book it, and you kind of go off to some other house or some other room in your house, and they pay you to use your house.
Right.
And that same model is also happening for Uber, and that's a company which does the same for people's cars. So you don't rent taxis anymore in most parts of America. You get an Uber. What's an Uber? It's someone like me that says, well, I got 2 hours to kill. I'd like to make some money, and I've got a car. I'll drive it around and be a taxi driver. And so, again, it's the internet powers all this stuff with apps and websites. So as a user, I can get out my iPhone. I can rent someone's house. I can rent someone's car. They do all the work for me. I'm not going to a hotel. I'm not going to a taxi. So my advice to people here is realize that there's incredible opportunity to take ideas like that into new spaces. So what's the next thing that you can disintermediate? You know, what's the next barrier that exists? Look at your own life. What gets in the way of your life? Who do you have to pay to get things done? And is there a way that you can help other people avoid that through an app or a website?
Right. So I guess one of the main issues there is at a smaller scale, right? We have these big giants, and then we have the little, what should I say?
David and Goliath.
The David and Goliath. So from the David point of view, what do you think we need to do to make that space, to keep that space going forward?
I'm not worried about David.
Not worried, huh?
I think David has an easier job than Goliath. Because the thing is, I see this all the time, as companies mature to a certain point, they get too big for themselves, and they're slow. So David can run around them. David can innovate. So if you got your company and your startup, you can make changes really fast, whereas a more established company with hundreds or thousands or millions of customers has to move very slowly for fear of alienating those customers or integrating new features that are compatible with the old ones. David doesn't have to worry about that. So David's in a better place.
Interesting.
Not that I worry about Goliath.
No, I understand. So coming back to Korea again, so you have learned many languages, I understand, and you have a fascination with foreign languages as well?
I love languages. You know, as a student, I spent a lot of time learning as much as I could. I really appreciate the calligraphy of Hangul, as well as, you know, Sanskrit, Russian. I dabbled with Chinese. I dabbled with Japanese, but I don't consider myself in any way proficient. Latin, I speak Spanish. What I appreciate about language is that universal structure. You know, I don't necessarily believe everything that Chomsky says about language, but there are deep structures about language, and I think at root we're all the same people. And culture, you know, is flavors. You know, we're different flavors of the same person, and language is an expression of culture.
So language may ultimately what saves us in a way, humans' ability to have this deeper understanding between them.
Well, and you know, in a way, you can transcend language to get that experience. So I come back to like visual storytelling.
Interesting.
There's an app that Twitter has recently that they released called Periscope.
Periscope.
And the cool thing with Periscope is I can open up my smartphone, and I can, when I'm back home in America, I can look to see what's happening in Seoul, and people are walking around, and they're broadcasting their lives. I can see life from their perspective, and I can be in their shoes. And I don't have to understand what they're saying as I see them crossing the street, and I see them buying bulgogi. Because I've been here and I appreciate it. It's languageless. It's a common human culture.
Well, it's a fascinating storytelling about your company and your visions for the future, and we very much appreciate your taking the time to meet with us here at the G Lounge today.
I loved it. Thank you, Emmanuel. This has been awesome for me. Seriously.
Pleasure.